Okay, we are back. I'm very happy to have on the Goldstein on Gelt show Liz Weston, who is a columnist for the personal finance site NerdWallet, and she also wrote a great book called Your Credit Score. Liz, a real pleasure to have you.
Doug, it's great to be here.
So, one of the issues I understand as far as credit scores is that people have to deal with debt. But it seems to me that the idea is you're supposed to have debt and then pay it off in order to have a good credit score, and then have more debt and pay it off. What's the bottom line here?
Well, actually, the good news is that you do not have to have debt or carry debt to have a good credit score. You do have to use credit. And I think that's where people get confused. They, look at a credit card and think that's debt. Well, if you use a credit card for convenience only, which is the way I was taught by my mother, and the way that, maybe a third to 40% of credit card users actually do it, you are paying your balance off in full every month. So whatever you charge, you're going to have to pay it off. If you use a credit card that way, you're building your credit scores and you're not incurring debt. So I don't pay a dime of interest on my credit cards. I have a bunch of them. I use them a lot, pay them off in full every month. My credit scores are golden. Although, just as an aside, my husband's credit scores are higher, which is so irritating to me. I just get
Why would that be? How does that happen?
Because he's older. And that's what I tell him. You've just had, credit longer. That's the only reason that your scores are consistently higher than mine. So that makes me feel better anyway. And it's probably true.
So there are people who are credit card users who are very, very disciplined like you, because you have to be because you're in the public eye. Mm-hmm. Okay, good for you. But we know that most people who use credit cards are not always so disciplined and end up having a problem and end up accumulating debt. Is it worth it to obviously, advisors like us say you shouldn't do that. But if they're going to do it anyway, is it really worth accumulating the debt so that you can develop a better credit score?
Well, I wouldn't say it's ever worth accumulating credit card debt. That to me is a real problem. Now, if you cannot use a credit card responsibly at all, maybe there's a way to still improve your credit scores simply by getting a personal loan. This is a way that, in the United States, people do this a lot. They get what's called a credit builder loan, and they pay it off over 12 months. And their payments are actually going into a CD, essentially. So it's a savings account, and they get the savings back. So they're paying a little bit of interest, but they're building a savings account, and they're building their credit score. So in that case, taking on a little debt and paying a little interest, that makes sense. But I do think it's kind of a myth that people can't handle credit cards. We've got this idea that everybody who's got a credit card has got $15,000 worth of debt. It's actually not true. If you look at the Federal Reserve statistics, of the people who do carry credit card debt, the median is somewhere between $2,500 and $3,000. So I would rather it would be zero, but we're still looking at a ton of people who are not carrying a ton of debt.
So where does that $15,000 number come from?
This one is just, it drives me crazy. It's driven me crazy for 20 years. What they're doing is they're taking the amount owed in, say, December of a certain year, and they're dividing it by the number of credit card carrying households, okay? The problem with that is they're including all the balances that are going to be paid off in full, as soon as the people get the bill, like we do in our household. They're also including all the business cards. If you're using a card for your business and your company's paying it off or you're getting reimbursed to pay it off, that's included. And so it really distorts the actuality of what the debt situation is like. So you have a situation, and I don't know if when you took statistics back in college, you know that with averages, they can really be skewed by outliers. And that's what's happening. We've got data that's not cleaned up to start with, and then you've got a few people with a ton of debt. And all that is skewing the average up. The reality...
Wait, that's a couple of things you said. I just want to clarify. You're saying that by the end of December, there might be a huge amount of debt owed on credit cards, but all these people come January will be paying it off, and therefore, whatever that huge amount is, they're going to pay it off in time without paying an interest payment.
Yeah, and it's not just December. I mean, if you picked any month out of the year, you're going to have a chunk of people who always pay their balances off in full, and it's a good chunk of people. And then you have, like I said, the business credit card debt is mixed in there. But you also have the issue, that second issue I talked about, of outliers, people who have a ton of credit card debt, and those are skewing the averages. So the number you need to look at is the median, and the median amount of credit card debt owed by the people who have credit cards is, somewhere in the neighborhood of $2,500 to $3,000. And that's been the case, for umpty-ump years since I've been looking at this. I think I started looking at these numbers in 1998. So it's really a big myth. And what bothers me about it most of all is that it normalizes credit card debt, and credit card debt is not the norm.
Mm-hmm. We're talking with Liz Weston, who is a personal finance writer at NerdWallet, also wrote the book about your credit score. We've been talking about credit scores, and she is dismissing the myth that there is an average of about $15,000 of credit card debt going on out there. And you also mentioned about this credit builder loan. The whole purpose of this loan is you just borrow money and then pay it back to show someone that you can pay it back?
Yeah, basically. And they started, I think, in credit unions, started with this idea because they knew there were a lot of people out there who were having trouble getting on the escalator, the getting started with credit so that they could get better credit scores, so they could get better deals. And it's not just on, loans and what interest rate you get. Credit scores in the United States are used to determine your auto insurance premiums, your home insurance premiums, what kind of cell phone plan deals you get. I think T-Mobile was the one that said half of its customers couldn't get the best plan because of their credit. Deposits on utilities. It's just throughout our system here in the U.S. So credit scores are really important. If you don't have credit, you're kind of being left out of that. So the idea behind the credit builder loan was we'll give people a head start in building credit. But rather than just take the money ourselves or, let them spend it on whatever, we'll put it in a savings account or a CD so that as you make your payments, once you've made all 12 payments, you get the cash that's been sitting in that that savings account. So now you not only have a start on decent credit, and in 1 year you can build pretty good credit, you also have a savings account, which most, people in the United States either don't have or it's not sufficient. You've probably seen those statistics that, something like...
I was going to ask you, are those statistics true?
Yeah, honestly. If
the average person has $10,000 or less or something by the time he retires?
Much, much less. The latest statistic out of the Fed was something like 45% of adults in the U.S. couldn't handle a $400 emergency without borrowing money.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, a lot of this seems to also fall on younger people. It seems that a lot of young folks are ending up in debt, when they're starting out, which is, it's never fun to be in debt, but it means that, you're just really starting out behind the eight ball. Yeah. A, is that true? You can be my fact checker. And B, what can they do about that?
Well, yes, it is true is the bottom line. And in one sense, it's not unusual because, when you're starting out, you're not making a lot of money. If you want to buy a house, for example, the only way to do that for most people is going to be a mortgage. So you do kind of borrow against your future. If you want an education, if you want to invest in your future income generating capacity, you probably need education loans, student loans. And so there is a sort of a precedent for being in debt when you're young and then paying it off over time. The problem that we've got, particularly here in the U.S., is that the cost of education have so far outstripped inflation, and people's ability to pay for it is that the student loan burden is getting heavier and heavier. And you'll see there's outliers that have six-figure student loan debt. That's not the norm, but the norm is growing. I think we're up to an average of $30,000 of student loans. It's not.
And do you think it's true that people who are investing in student loans, if we call it that, it's questionable whether they're going to make the money back because a lot of them are investing in education, which is not really job oriented?
Well, no, because I think there are some outliers that never are better off. And this has been true in the past. I think like 1 out of 7 women and 1 out of 5 men are not going to earn any more with a college degree than they would have, than the typical high school diploma would have earned them. So but that's generally the case. I think overall, what we're seeing is that education is actually a better deal than it used to be. It's more expensive, yes, but the people who only have high school educations are falling so far behind. They basically dropped off an economic cliff. So that college degree really is, if you want to stay in the middle class, it's going to require some post-secondary education. And if you want to get ahead at all, you might be looking at, at least a 4-degree degree and perhaps a master's degree, graduate degree.
Huh. And so then those people who are going into debt in order to pay for the school, of course, it's very hard for them at that age to start saving for retirement as well, simply because cash is going the wrong way. Is there any possibility, or do we just have to wait until they finish school, pay off the debt, start a life and a real job, and then say, okay, now let's talk about saving for your retirement?
Well, Doug, I'd back it up one step, because just because borrowing for an education can make sense does not mean that borrowing an unlimited amount for any education makes sense. So I'd like to step us back that, if you cannot pay cash for something, you have to be very careful how much you borrow. And in terms of a college education, you don't want to borrow more in total than you expect to make your first year out of school. If we could just get people to adhere to that, or to limit themselves to just what's available under the U.S. federal student loan system rather than going private loans, I think we wouldn't have a crisis, or the crisis would, the people having problems with student loan debt would be much, much smaller because, under the federal system, you can only borrow about $33,000 max, I think. So you're looking at a very reasonable number. You can pay that off in 10 years. You are going to make at least $30,000 out of college unless you really
Hopefully,
screwed up.
hopefully.
Yeah. So if we can put a limit on how much debt, or people would put their own limits on how much debt they take on, you can still get a good education for that. That's the thing. I mean, people are going for private educations and borrowing a ton of money, and that doesn't make sense. But a limited amount of debt, reasonable, that will make sense. And if that's the case, you can save for retirement. That is not going to be a problem because your student loan payments will be less than 10% of your income. You put another 10, 15% towards retirement, you're good to go.
Okay, and good to go. That is great advice, which is realizing that you can both save as well as pay off debt at the same time, which I think really is an important lesson. Don't just feel like you can only accomplish one thing at a time.
Oh, yeah. I mean, it feels more satisfying to just go at that debt and get it done, but you cannot get back the time that you're losing. You can't get back the company matches that you've passed up, the tax breaks you won't get, and most importantly, that wonderful, compounding. Compounded returns is like this, miracle of the world, and you do not want to start late. If you don't get started on retirement savings by the time you're about 35, it's almost impossible to catch up. And I mean, that's awful news for a lot of people to hear, but the reality is it's really, really tough. So, get started from your first job. Put some money aside for retirement.
All right. Liz, that's some really great advice. In fact, I'm sure you have plenty more, but unfortunately, we are just about out of time. So in the last few seconds, tell us, how can people follow you and follow your work?
Well, come to my website. It's AskLizWeston.com, and you'll find links to NerdWallet, which is a great personal finance site to help you answer your financial questions. And it also has links to my books like Your Credit Score, Deal with Your Debt, all that good stuff.
Okay, we will put a link to that at the show notes of today's show at goldsteinongelt.com. Liz Weston, thanks so much for your time.
Oh, my pleasure, Doug. Thanks for the invitation.
You've been listening to the Goldstein on Gelt Show with money maven Doug Goldstein. Doug's weekly radio show is heard around the world, but if you miss it, you can download the podcast at www.goldsteinongelt.com. The Goldstein on Gelt Show gives you up-to-date financial ideas so you can get on the path to financial freedom. If you'd like your questions answered on the air or off, send Doug an email to doug@profile-financial.com. It's your money for your future, so join Doug every week to build your wealth on the Goldstein on Gelt Show.